Matty Fresh on the track up at State. And I'm bringing to you live my boys Alec and Nate. Tequila Ty, Jay, Nelly, and Zillin in the building. So kick it back, pour the drink. We chillin' because I'm boozing and betting and balling like I'm 2-6 in the blue kicks. Watch me move quick. Yeah, this the blueprint. So who's getting involved? Welcome into the show. This is Booze, Bets, and Ball, baby.
And welcome back to Booze, Bets, and Ball. I think this is the record for the earliest episode we've ever done. 8:10, 8:12 Eastern, 7:12 Central. You're in Central, right?
Yes.
Okay, so earliest one we've ever done. Nelly's been up since 5:30, but we don't know where he is now. So early bird special on Thursday today to talk about the Penn State-Wisconsin game. Took the week off from the USC game. We probably should have said some things on that because, one, that was a hell of a game that they came very close to losing multiple times. Drew Allard looked, I think, the most comfortable and confident he's ever looked. And I think I've said those few things about him a lot this season, but the comeback was impressive. Tyler Warren had the best game I think I've seen by a Penn State player since that Saquon game against Iowa in 2017 where he touched the ball like almost 50 times or whatever it was. Just 17 catches, 224 yards, a touchdown, completed a pass, rushed, I think, twice. Should have had a couple more touchdowns too. There was one that was called back for me. A ticky-tack pass interference call in Fleming, but those two guys played, and Ryan Barker, game-winning field goal. Penn State might have a kicker. We'll see. Definitely a lot better than how the season started with the kicking game. So a lot to be happy about with that one. Turns out maybe, I don't know, USC maybe it's not that good. Blew a lead to Maryland. Now it's 4 losses already, which is crazy. But we are going to be talking about a team that lost to USC in Wisconsin, but a team that's also gotten hot, rattled off 3 straight wins for Wisconsin after getting blown out at home by Alabama, losing their starting quarterback in the game, and then going cross country and blowing a 21-10 lead to USC and lost 38-21. So they gave up 28 unanswered. But since then, they've been blowing teams out. Now, they haven't really played good teams, but it's something to keep your eye on. They didn't let the injury to the quarterback and the 2 straight blowout losses kind of spiral them. And, that's something you got to keep tabs on because it's a team that clearly has not given up.
Yeah. Going back just a bit to the USC game, because I think there is parallel to what you were talking about with respect to the Iowa game as well, where Penn State kind of, at least early on, should have been up by way more, or should have been up at all, I guess, right? They had the one terrible pass interference call, a couple other drives stalled, and that's kind of very similar to what happened in that Iowa game in 2017, where it was way too close for comfort at the end. But then, the McSorley, Saquon, Juwan Johnson drive that was the winner there. Very similar to the way Aller kind of navigated the end of this USC game. And you had an excellent performance from probably the best player on the offense, and then the quarterback really stepped up. So, and what did that do? That propelled Penn State. I mean, they lost the OSU game that they should have probably won that year, right? So it did pay good dividends for a while, at least, and got them up to a very high ranking, and kind of kept things going. Now, again, notwithstanding the loss to Ohio State and then the terrible loss to Michigan State, I don't think those are in the cards this year. Well, I don't think a Michigan State loss is in the cards this year, or a loss like that, I guess, because we don't play Michigan State. But additionally, now you talk about Wisconsin, and Luke Fickell is a very good coach, I think, and he will, he's not going to let his guys give up. He's probably what was one of the top coaching prospects going into the last few years, and I think we look for him to be, continue to be that, whether they do get blown out by Alabama or whether they do get a 28-point loss to USC. But like you said, the teams that the three teams that they've beaten, Rutgers, Purdue, and Northwestern, are really not good. And I feel like on one hand, they have blown them out. But if I've done some looking yesterday about, statistically where they are relative to what the performance of their opponents was, and they're kind of beating them in line with what their opponents or what the other opponents are. So, for example, Wisconsin is scoring relative to opponent points allowed 102% of that. So, like, for example, if an opponent is giving up 20 points per game, and Wisconsin scores 21 points per game, that would be 105% of expectation. On average, they're only scoring 102%. And one of those, one thing that brings them down is the Alabama game where they only scored 47%. They are giving up fewer points. They are giving up far fewer points than they should, probably. And they're 62% relative to expectation. But the rest of the stats are kind of the same. And, Penn State is doing a far better job of outscoring opponents' expectation than Wisconsin is. So, like, I get that they're hot, and I get that they played, I don't know, they scored 50 points and they beat Northwestern by 20, and Rutgers sucks, and they, kind of put it on Rutgers. But these are three of the worst, probably 4 or 5 teams in the Big Ten. So that needs to be stated as well.
Yeah, that is the obvious. There's a thing though about confidence, just gaining some back, and I think clearly when you blow teams out in a row like that, that happens. Like I kind of look at the 2016 Penn State team. They lose the emotional game to Pitt, then get blown out by Michigan, but then they win a couple like close emotional games in a row against Temple was sandwiched in there, a close game, and obviously the Minnesota walk-off overtime game. And it just kind of builds, and you get lucky, home night game against a highly ranked team. Like, you just got to come prepared. And my two problems with this Penn State team this year has been slow first half defense and inefficient red zone offense. Andy Kotelnicki dials up a lot of great plays, and a lot of time they're scoring from outside the red zone now. But when they get down there is when things get a little weird for me. If they have a very successful drive passing the ball, he seems to try to run in the red zone. And then if they got down there running, and this was in the Bowling Green game a lot, which is why I think this game was closer than it should have been. They were running the ball pretty well. Then they got down into the red zone, and they started throwing the ball. And Aller threw that one weird pick in the end zone that he had no business throwing. Even throwing the ball, they should never snap that play. And there were a couple other instances where they just couldn't score via pass down in the red zone when they were running the ball pretty well, and flip-flop too. So that's something for me. Like, don't want to be settling for 3 instead of 7 on the road. Something they did a couple times against USC, and obviously that game ended up in overtime. So they also.
I'll give you that. I think that the red zone offense has been a little bit. It looks bad. I will tell you though. So I sent something to our friends at For the Bloggy this week. He was asking for some data on points per red zone attempt. So this is like basically if they score a touchdown on a red zone attempt, they get 7 points. If they score a field goal, they get 3 points. It's the calculation from there, right? So Penn State shockingly is 21st in the country with 5.64 points per red zone attempt. So I think it's manifested itself poorly at inopportune times. But it's not all that bad too. So it's interesting. Like it doesn't look great, but it's not as bad as you would think. And the average is somewhere in the 5 range. So they're getting a full additional point above average. So it's not that bad. And just, I guess, see where Wisconsin is.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the two games that were close this season, Bowling Green, USC. Yeah. Both the issues were the defense was really bad in the first half, and the offense was settling for 3 instead of 7 in the red zone. And now you play, your two toughest game stretch here back to back at Wisconsin at night and then home versus Ohio State. Are those things going to happen again because you're playing a team with equal and greater talent than you in Ohio State,
Yep.
and a team that's probably not as talented as you, but a well-coached, motivated team at home in Wisconsin? So, that's what concerns me about those two things. I mean, Penn State's given up 60 points in the first half, which isn't it's not crazy, but for Penn State in a half through 6 games, it might be, especially if you factor in, games against teams like Kent State and UCLA who can't do a single thing on offense, and only 27 in the second half. So obviously they've gotten better in the second half. It's just, if you give this Wisconsin team a lead at home, at half, the crowd staying in it all game. You didn't really have that problem. You were down 20-6 to USC at half. The thing is, that was pretty much half a home game. Not a very hostile crowd at all. That's not going to be the case when you go to Madison. So that's just something, that I'm keeping in mind is you got to keep the crowd out of it. And 2 ways to do that is not let them get up early. And for you, when you get in the red zone, to get 7 instead of 3. Those are the 2 things that help do that. So I think that's why, my eyes are raised a little bit for this game, just because the 2 things that Penn State struggled with at times can give you problems on a road game against a well-coached team.
Yep. Those are good observations, I think. And, it's been most of the first drives of every game.
Yeah.
And this started with Bowling Green. I don't remember Illinois, but USC didn't happen where, the opposing offense drives down the field and kind of sticks it to us a little bit, right? And you have to avoid that this time. And it does seem like Tom Allen's first halves are far worse than the second halves, as you said, both in terms of points allowed, but then also defensive aggressiveness and kind of sacks, tackles for loss, all the things. And you would like to see them put that together to start the game and continue for 60 minutes, because against Ohio State, never mind, like you said, Wisconsin this week, but you can't go down to Ohio State by 14 or 17 points and expect to come back. So they need to clean that up now. And then one thing, though, here, too, where you might expect you'd be concerned a lot is on turnovers. And, Penn State does not give up a lot of turnovers. Wisconsin does, and Wisconsin does not create a lot of turnovers. So, the Wisconsin quarterback has had an interception in every game.
Mm-hmm.
He has 5 interceptions so far, and Wisconsin generates almost none. So that bodes well. And if you can steal one in the first half and then turn a turnover into points, that puts you as a +1 sort of thing. And they need to do that, I think, to take the crowd out of it, like you're saying.
Yeah, so obviously, Wisconsin passes a lot more than they used to with this Phil Longo air raid that they have on offense. Obviously, it's not all the way there yet, and I don't know if it ever will be with Wisconsin, but obviously they're still a run-first team. They average 41 attempts per game and 194 yards and almost over 2.5 touchdowns per game, which on the ground, which is a lot, obviously. Penn State's given up 95 rush yards a game. The average is 3.2, I think, and that went up a lot against USC because they have that 75-yard kind of trick play reverse touchdown, and then they had another play that was supposed to be a trick play that was supposed to be a pass play that just ended up in a rush that went for, I think, 42 yards, something like that. So, but Penn State's kind of normal rush defense, so to say, has been very good. So that number, that 95's inflated a little bit, I think, from that game and those 2 trick plays. It's probably closer to 80 yards per game, which I think you could give up over 100 to Wisconsin on the ground and not kill you. But once you start getting over 150 to 200 is where this is going to become a problem. I think Penn State could get after the quarterback. The thing that concerns me is that this guy does not have a very high yards per attempt, which means they're getting the ball out quick. And we saw in the Bowling Green game that if Abdul Carter, Denai Dennis and all those defensive tackles aren't given time to get home, Penn State's pass defense is shown to be a little weak, especially up the seam and in the flats. Without KJ Winston out there at safety too, so that is one concern I have, is just the quick hitters seem to kill them, which that's been an everlasting thing with this team. I feel like, just because how good the pass rush has been since Franklin's got in here. But those are two things that kind of worry me about the Wisconsin offense. But other than that, they don't have the game-breaking athletes that USC does, so that that's something to keep in mind. But I think they'll be difficult at times. It really comes down to making them one-dimensional and getting a lead early, because you want to make them have to throw down the field and not just these 4 and 5 yard clips, where the pass rush can get home. So that it's important that Penn State does start this game hot instead of trying to play from behind, which they've had to do a few times this season.
Yeah. Okay, so on the Penn State run defense, I think that's a pretty good point. So if you take out those 2 runs, and I know you can't because they happened, but those 2 runs increased the average yards per game by 20.
Yeah.
If you take those out and you gave that USC everything else they have, they dropped to 75 yards per game, and they're at they're still at 3.2 yards per carry, which is one of the higher. Let's see, where is that rank in the Big Ten? That ranks 3rd, even by giving up a 75 and a 45, I think is what I called it. So that's something. There was Landon Tangwall yesterday tweeted something about the Wisconsin quarterback Braden Locke having one of the fastest times to throw in college football at 2.3 seconds, which goes to the air raid type offense that you mentioned. USC was supposed to be the same. USC is similar to that, right? They were going to get it out kind of quick thing, and that does a couple of things. Like you said, it hurts it's tough. It's been tough for the Penn State defense to overcome some of those type of throws until you have AJ Harris jumping a slant route at the end of the Illinois game for an interception. That we can do better on that earlier, but then also playing that way, the average depth of target is really short. So you do not expect a lot of over the top stuff from Wisconsin, and Tom Allen should be adjusting to that, right? Because they play so short. So hopefully they learn something from Illinois. They learn something from USC that they apply this week. And I know they're not exactly the same offenses, but it's conceptually very similar offenses in terms of short, quick hitters that are meant to be like running plays rather than, take the top off kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just kind of looking at what Alabama did to Wisconsin, because I guess if you're going to try to draw some parallels to teams Wisconsin's played that match up similarly to Penn State, Alabama, I think, is a little more talented. Obviously, they have 2 losses now, but I mean, they had a pretty equal distribution day. 181 rush yards, 3 touchdowns, 226 pass yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, they put up 48 or 42, so they were pretty efficient, and a lot of it was a nice mix of red zone and big plays. So I think that's something Penn State has to do. You got to hit the big plays, but you also have to be able to finish in the red zone with touchdowns. So I think, you kind of look at what the 2 teams that have similar talent to Penn State have done to Wisconsin's defense this year, USC and Alabama, and they're averaging 40 points a game. So, you got to look at that. You got to think, you got to hope the floor for Penn State's offense in this game is around 31 points. And for all of Penn State's defensive struggles this season, I'd be very shocked if the Wisconsin offense was able to get over, around 25 points against them. So I think, you get to 31, you should be safe. But I mean, last obviously was one of the, not counting the Ole Miss Peach Bowl because of how many guys opted out. That was the worst defensive showing by Penn State we've seen in a couple of years. I think since maybe Ohio State in 2022. So that it was a shock to kind of see that because we haven't seen it in a while. But it obviously raises some alarms. But I think that Wisconsin's offense, when they've played these big time teams too, they've scored 21 and I think they had 10 against Alabama. So, their average is around 15 in those games. So in the two teams that are similar to Penn State in terms of, skill and preseason ranks and all that, the average score of the game is 40 to 15. So I think Penn State, has to try to, I don't know if they'll win by 25 night home game for Wisconsin, but the signs point that this game maybe shouldn't be that close if you look at kind of teams that you can draw parallels to with Penn State.
Yeah. Wisconsin did have 2 turnovers in that Alabama game. Alabama, like you're saying, Alabama scored quite quick on a couple of drives. They had, they had a 1 play for 37-yard touchdown. They had 3 for 18 off a fumble, which again, they were at Wisconsin. They get a turnover. Both of the turnovers they turned into touchdowns. Penn State needs to do that. They need to generate a touchdown, turnover, turn that into something. And Alabama had 2 for 73 with a 47 and a 26-yard pass. So I think they can be exploited. And I was watching the Locked On podcast, I guess, with the Alabama and Penn State crossover, and they were talking about how I think the secondary of Wisconsin is maybe not the strength of them. So you get Amari Evans out there, Julian Fleming, the receivers now. Amari Evans still struggles with drops occasionally, I feel like. Fleming had some drops early in the USC game that he really made up for, obviously, in the 2 4th down conversions. But Liam Clifford is turning into a really kind of reliable receiver. Trey Wallace, obviously, is solid.
He's stayed healthy, too, which is a new thing.
So, you have a lot more weapons. And then, people were saying that they should be queuing much more on Ty Warren this week and, maybe giving him a little extra love and double teaming him more. And if they do that, I fully expect Kotelnicki to be able to exploit any gaps that are there in that Wisconsin secondary and kind of take the top off of them and let, Evans is really the only deep threat there. Maybe Trey Wallace second, but the other 2 guys, not so much. But really kind of open it up a little bit now.
Yeah, I think they need to. And I think Nick Singleton clearly was dealing with something for the past month. Didn't play in the USC game or didn't play in the UCLA game, and then was very limited in the USC game. Did catch the touchdown at the end of the game that put it into overtime. Man, that drive was so similar to the Purdue drive in 22. Pretty much the same play they scored on, just top flipping it up to the running back in the right side of the end zone. Very similar there, but how's my train of thought? But no, so I think he'll be
better. He's better. Things are much different, right?
He's had the bye week. I think he'll be more explosive this week too, which they need to get back because it's something they've missed the last month or so now. Katron Allen's been a little quiet the last couple of weeks too. I think he kind of, I don't want to say, he gets kind of rewarded in a sense based off of Singleton's explosiveness because these teams deal with trying to catch him, and then all of a sudden he comes in and these guys are tired and he's running over them, because he's more of that power back. They complement each other well. So when Singleton isn't in there doing his thing, it also hurts what Allen does. So getting Singleton back to full health helps everyone in the running back room. So that's something as well. And it also, for as much as I roll my eyes at it sometimes, it does help the Bo Prabula package when teams need to be keen on where Singleton is when they do this option read stuff. So, it helps Bo get some running lanes too when they do that package, which I don't think is going anywhere. But
it's not. But also the first 50 times we saw it, it was just the normal read option, and Bo keeps it like 42 out of the 50 times or whatever. So you get a little bit irritated by it, but then he comes in and he throws a double pass, to Aller, and then that Ty Warren touchdown to open the second half, which was an incredible play, right? It was an incredible design and executed play that if they don't score quickly there, or certainly if they don't score at all, that game is over, right?
Yeah.
And that was a giant momentum changer. So I am 100% sure that there are other things in that package that we haven't seen yet that are going to be really exciting. So I don't know. I hated it, and I still kind of hate it, but now it's like a little more benefit of the doubt kind of thing, right? So
yeah, the fact they've added that dimension to it where Aller isn't totally out of the play when he comes in, because the thing is, when the fact that Aller doesn't leave the field, it kind of restricts you to what you can do, because you're taking kind of a skill position player off the field when you have two quarterbacks out there. So keeping Aller in the play, I don't think we'll ever get to the point where Aller is catching passes off of this. I know that Sean Clifford was catching passes towards the end of his career. I think part of that was that it was towards the end of his career, and Drew Aller was the backup quarterback. It's a lot easier to put a quarterback in harm's way when Sean Clifford was probably the most beat up quarterback in Penn State history. So I don't think he cared if he got hit. And two, the backup, you had a lot of faith in. I think the Bo Prabula package is fun. I don't know how much faith they have in him though, if he was the actual starting quarterback. So I don't think you'll be seeing Drew catch passes anytime soon, but I think they'll keep some of those things open, which is nice.
Well, he did catch one for 4 yards last year against Michigan. I vaguely remember that. I don't remember the situation, but
oh yeah,
it was on a 4th down or some shit, right?
Was that one where it got like was it like batted down and he caught it?
No, that was an Ole Miss. I think the Michigan one was like a real
okay
that he had. The Ole Miss one, I think he threw it and it got batted down to him and whatever. How was that both of those games? Wild. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you don't want Drew Aller to get hurt, right? this season takes a very different turn if he is not the starting quarterback. But anyway, I don't know. I like the package is growing on me. And then you look at all the other stuff that they do with Ty Warren too, and he's throwing passes. He's obviously catching passes, but then there was that one first down rush around the USC 40 where he goes in motion and then goes under center, and Aller pretends that he can't hear or whatever. And then they get 5 yards out of that. Like, the utilization of the personnel here is just like, it's not even in the same universe as what it was last year. And that is a boon to this team, right? And it will continue to be so. So Wisconsin has to prepare for about 8,000 things that, otherwise they would, if it was last year, they would not have had to. That's good.
Yeah. Penn State, especially at receiver, isn't very talented, so to say, but they're incredibly versatile. Singleton and Allen could both catch passes. Tyler Warren played quarterback in high school, and we see they've taken full advantage of that. And guys like Fleming and Clifford and Evans can pretty much play all three receiver spots. They're very versatile in where they can line up. They're not the game-breaking guys that Ohio State and Alabama and the likes have, but they're versatile. And Andy Kolnicki's taking advantage of the fact that he has guys that could play everywhere to make up for the fact that they're not the most super talented guys. And that's definitely helping. His backup quarterback being a versatile athlete too has obviously helped. So he's doing the best with what he has, and it's working so far. And I think putting some of that stuff on film, like the Tyler Warren under center thing. So if they try to run that again and all of the defense starts to crowd the line, then seeing like what that was, and all of a sudden he either flips to the side or takes the snap, everyone comes up, the safeties bite, you could hit a deep play on that play now. So a lot of different things that they're showing at the right time. I think, part of the reason they opened up a lot more against USC was, one, they needed to try to win the game, but two, I think that kind of stuff was planned going in to put stuff on tape for Wisconsin and Ohio State, give them things to look at, things to prepare for. And it, because you win at the USC game, it all worked out. But now it's putting that stuff to use that you did it. And I just hope that, and I think Kotelnicki will, but this is the most hostile environment they're going to play in all season.
Yep.
Because, West Virginia, that game was at noon, and with the rain delay, that place was dead by the whole entire second half. USC, horrible home field advantage, 3:00 game. This is the most hostile crowd they're going to play in all season. So I just hope that they don't dial things back then, because they're too worried about making a mistake, because so far it's kind of how you've been successful, is keeping teams on their toes with all the different personnel and setups you've been using.
Yeah, I do. I don't know. You can kind of put down the West Virginia crowd and the USC. I mean, the USC game was that was 11:30 local, I think, right, or whatever. So that's a super early game, and it was mostly Penn State. But having those experiences, regardless of how hostile they were, I mean, they still had to go do the thing. It's like you go into the visitor locker room, right? You travel all the way across the country, and obviously, Wisconsin is closer to West Virginia than it is USC, so that's actually a good thing. But you're still going through the motions of being the visitor in a game that you should win, similarly to this one, and you're expected to win, but people, the locals want you to lose. So I think having those experiences is not bad. It's not going to be the same as this is, but also you think about like Ohio State. When Ohio State comes to Beaver Stadium at night or at noon next week or whatever it is, they're going to be 6-point favorites, 6 to 10-point favorites, just like Penn State is going to Wisconsin. And they're going to have all the confidence that they're going to win that game. Ohio State's not going to come here and say, "Oh, we lost to Penn State 8 years ago," and when none of these kids were even in high school by that time. Penn State should have the same expectation, and I think they have grown a lot as a program in the way that James Franklin manages them and manages their schedule and manages their emotions, I think. And Drew Aller is much more fiery now than he was last year. I don't know. They should not lack confidence in their talent and their abilities to win this game. And, Vegas has them favored. It started at 10. It's down a little bit now because, people see Wisconsin winning 3 games by 20, 50 or 48 and 35. But again, that's against crap. So,
yeah,
if I think there's a lot of Penn State fans that are quite negative or down about this, or some at least. And there's a lot of Wisconsin fans that think they're going to blow us out. The truth is somewhere well in the middle of that.
Yeah, I think so. And kind of the final thought I had on this game is, obviously you want to win every game, but this one is important to win because I think they need to be undefeated going into that Ohio State game, because I'm a little worried that if you lose this week and then you go into that Ohio State game, that they're going to play the Ohio State game not to lose.
Yeah,
they're not going to be as loose, and any Kotelnicki might dial back all the things he wants to do, because with the 12-team playoff, if you lose to Ohio State, probably still in pretty good shape to go 11-1. You're going to be a high seed in the playoff, and you're not totally out of the Big Ten championship game picture at that point. I think that's why it's critical they win this Wisconsin game, because then you can go into the Ohio State game and throw your entire book at them, because it really, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't matter all that much if you lose. But if you lose this Wisconsin game and you go into the Ohio State game tight, all of a sudden you're pretty much looking at 2 straight losses, and then you have to worry about it snowballing. And with the way a lot of these teams are still undefeated at this point in the season, and the way they still give 2-loss SEC teams a lot of credit so far, you have to be careful, and you can be out of the playoff picture in a hurry if you let that happen. So that's why I think, to me, this game is very critical to the season. And that might be a very obvious statement, but in college football, it's very hard to lose and still make the playoff. But I think that's why this is so important, just because what's next week and beyond.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, just like you said, I mean, if you lose this, then you're down, and then you lose to Ohio State, and then Washington comes, and Washington's not very good, obviously, right? But they beat Michigan. They've got some wins. They've got an experienced team. They can beat you, and then whatever. Then you have Purdue, Minnesota, Maryland, and you're going to win those. But 9-3 definitely puts you out of the playoffs. 10-2 is really touch and go, because now you're tied with Wisconsin. You're behind Indiana. You're behind could be behind Illinois, and you're behind Oregon and Ohio State, right? So like you're really in a deep thick of Big Ten teams by that point, because Wisconsin can, I think, still go 10-2. Indiana, Illinois can go 11-1. Ohio State can go 11-1, and Oregon can go 12-0. So you are kind of out of it, I think, if you lose both. If you lose 2 games, almost, we're pretty damn close to it. So this is now on the flip side. If they win this, then you can lose to Ohio State, win the rest of your games, and you're basically guaranteed in. So this is such a pivotal game for this team and making the playoffs that it's hard to understate. Actually, hard to overstate.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's wrap this up. Nelly did answer. He said his prediction for the game is Penn State 27, Wisconsin 10. So he has Penn State more than covering, obviously.
With the under, though, I think the over-under is like 47, right?
Yeah, so he's at 37.
I think I like 31. It's really coincidental that you mentioned 31 points before. I did some calculation, and I think based on expected yards gained and what the points per yard are and things like that, I have Penn State 31 and Wisconsin about 22, I'm going to say.
That checks out. Yeah, I think it's going to be a little more high scoring. I mentioned I think Wisconsin's defense has struggled when they've played talented offenses, and I would put Penn State in that category so far this season. But I also think Wisconsin's offense has found its footing a little bit post, quarterback injury, and I think running back injury too in there. So I think it'll be a little more high scoring. I'm like in a 34-20 range. I think the over hits. I think Penn State, though, is able to do enough offensively. I think after 6 games in a bye week, I'm hoping Tom Allen has figured out whatever the hell his first half defensive problem is, and that he doesn't need till halftime to adjust it, that he could go into a game knowing what needs to happen. I just think after 6 games of film and a week to digest all that he's figured it out to a point where we don't see, outside of maybe Ohio State, we don't see another 20-point defensive half from Penn State. I'd really like that to be the case, and I think we finally start to see a complete game from the defense this week.
Yeah, I agree. So just one final point here. So Wisconsin allowed against Western Michigan 5 yards a play, South Dakota 4.7, which is kind of gross. Alabama 7.3, USC 5.7, and now they're ranked. Wisconsin is ranked 30th in the country in yards per play allowed. But their 3 best games, Purdue, Rutgers, and Northwestern, were against like easily the 3 worst offenses that they've played. And like if you consider the Penn State offense to be anywhere near South Carolina or Alabama, then they're going to be like 6+ yards per play, which is, that's basically like would lead the country. So Penn State should put it on them, I think, offensively. I don't know. Now I'm like a little gun shy to be like, oh, they're going to blow them out 40-10 or something. So
yeah, we'll see. Obviously, Alabama and USC both won by 17+, which you would consider a blowout. So,
and for what it's worth, Penn State averages 7.2 yards per play right now. So they're in Alabama territory.
Well, I guess we will see what happens on Saturday night. Obviously, we will be back next week. Might have to do 2 next week, depending on how this Wisconsin game goes, and then leading into the Ohio State game. But going to be a busy week here for Penn State, so keep an eye out for that, obviously. So we'll be back next week, hopefully talking about another win. But as I always say, we'll see. So we'll see.
Very good.